As far as we know, there are no efforts to eliminate the internet, so you have no reasons to worry. But it's interesting to know what our life would be like without the internet, right? Although you can't even imagine it, that time existed. These are ancient times when everything was rural, kind of like the 90s, sort of. At that time, there were already such malevolent machines suddenly created some demon called computers. But although it may seem crazy, they were all disconnected from the other as if they were living in isolation and they were only used for nondescript tasks such as writing text or working. Thankfully, a few years later, everything changed. The internet came into our lives, cities grew, water irrigation watered our fields, and the world was filled with light and color. But what would it be like to live without the internet? Would you dare to live such a terrible scenario? Let's have a look at this terrible scenario. If you still didn't subscribe my channel, now subscribe and press the bell icon button to get latest notifications. Number 1. We would have to go out on the street to do our shopping. Do you know those places they call shops where some people do their shopping, especially old people? Well, if you didn't have the internet, you would have to shop there. Imagine that scenario. You want to buy a USB, for example, and you have to get off the couch, get dressed, and go out on the cold street. And on top of that, you have to do it only during opening hours because outside these hours the shops are closed. Would it be worth living like this? Number 2. We would need to look at maps to get to the places in a life without internet. You may be lucky to live in a time when maps are no longer needed, but those of us who have used them, we know the horrors of them. These were the days when it was necessary to look in a book or a map in order to find a way to reach another city or even worse, a specific street. And there was no one to understand that, no voice to guide on your way. Some people who were desperate were even reckless enough to ask other passers by about the best way to reach their destination. As we said, it was horrifying. Number 3. We would be much worse informed in a life without internet. Today, Google saves our lives several times a day, but imagine if it didn't exist, you would probably try to take your own life instantly. Luckily, you couldn't do it because without Google, you wouldn't know how to do it. Luckily, we have access to all the information provided by the internet, so we can easily read Immanuel Kant's complete works, learn more about Planck's constant, or find out what our cousin Segismundo, who has a coffee shop in Cuenca, had for breakfast yesterday. Oh, thank goodness. Number 4. We would be so very bored in a life without internet. Imagine that you have to take a train ride and you don't have a smartphone with signal coverage. Okay, don't get your thumbs up. We already know how bad you are every time you lose signal. So imagine that scenario 24 hours a day. Have you passed out? Well, I hope you haven't. There was a time when things were like this, and to cover up the idle times, we had to amuse ourselves with strange and unthinkable tasks like reading books and paper or looking at pedestrians. And people were happy. The survival capacity of human beings is almost limitless. Number 5. We should be talking to people face to face in a life without internet. Now imagine if social networks or WhatsApp didn't exist. Before you have a nervous breakdown, let me remind you of that time. Dark times in which we had to use instruments such as landline telephone, letters, carriers, pigeons, or even personal contact to communicate. Luckily, God created Tim Berners-Lee. Number 6. Everything would be much more difficult. Work, communications, leisure, everything would be harder, more uncomfortable, more difficult, and even dirtier. There are, however, those who argue that some things could improve. We would enjoy more time with our friends and family in person, or we could spend more time in the countryside while enjoying nature. But who wants those things? The internet is undoubtedly an absolute must nowadays. It has changed our lives to the point of turning the previous era into a fuzzy and terrible historical period, similar to the Middle Ages or even worse. Luckily, all that was left behind and happiness entered our lives for good. What would you do if there was no internet in your life? Tell me in the comment section. Thanks for watching the video. If you like this video, let me know by clicking the like button. Do share, write a comment, and don't forget to subscribe my channel so that you can catch up my next video. Thank you.